Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for taking some of your valuable time to join us today. I have a special guest today, Walter Rucker, who has become sort of my advisor on a number of subjects. For example, Bashar, which we're going to talk about today, and physical mediums, seances, all this kind of stuff. And I really respect his opinion. He's got apparently I would say probably the largest collection of Bashar material. And I'm also joined by my assistant Desta, who's going to be the person producing this and in the background, and my co-host who does some interviews with me, Sinead Willenhan. And so welcome, Walter, and I'm glad you're joining us here today for hopefully an insightful conversation on channeling. But before I get to that, we were just discussing as we were coming on here the fact that the University of Manitoba has a collection of material. They have, I think, was it just 50 collections of spiritual type material. And I've decided to move my material there because my presidential stuff I really don't look at anymore. And I have all the Canadian files from the Canadian government and from Wilbert Brockhouse Smith, all his files. And I'm going to start moving all that stuff there. And you had some contact with the University of Manitoba. Can you tell me what your situation with them was?
Yeah, I've also got a very extensive collection of Leslie Flint, the physical medium of materials, seance recordings, written materials, the like. And I had contacted them because somehow I had found out that they had taken in a large archive of Leslie Flint materials. Some gentleman, much the same as me over the years, has collected, bits and pieces and gave it to them. And I asked them, I got a hold of their head archivist and said, look, you've got all these, great materials, a lot of which have never been seen. And it sure would be great if you could put this stuff up online so people could have access to it. And their response was, go fly a kite, basically.
Wow.
It was, well, we can't do that because it's copyrighted. And I said, well, who says that you can't put it up? Who's claiming the copyright that prohibits you from making this information public? And it was a she at the time. She said, well, it's the Leslie Flint Foundation, which is claiming copyright to, and it's on their website, it says all Leslie Flint materials, which means all the material that I've collected over the years, some of which are originals, are now, they claim copyright, give them up. And I just said, no, this isn't right. They can't just claim a copyright on material that they've never had in their possession. And matter of fact, Leslie Flint passed material out willy-nilly. Typically, every seance, especially in his later years, was recorded, and those recorded seances would be given in tapes to the individual who were coming to the seance, especially if there was a primary sitter. So, excuse me. So we just got into it. I got nowhere with them. They just shut me off and refused to have. I mean, they were cordial about it, but they basically said, "No, I'm sorry. We're going to respect what we believe to be a copyright issue on this."
No, I just want to say, for people who don't know who Leslie Flint is, I'm aware of who he is and the importance of what he did. Can you explain what direct voice mediumship is and what Leslie Flint was doing?
Well, Leslie Flint was a direct voice medium, a physical medium. And in his direct voice sessions, he had something that was a little different than other channeling type mediums, which most mediums who channel, like Bashar, who we're talking about today, is coming through direct voice. Direct voice means using the vocal cords, the larynx, the lungs of the medium themselves to produce vocal sounds so that you can hear the entity coming through. Leslie Flint was really unusual, though. He was an independent direct voice medium. And the meaning of that is that he actually had an ectoplasmic larynx that would sit on or near his shoulder that came out of his skin, right in the carotid area here. And that would produce the the sounds of the entities, the spirits that were coming through in the seance. So rather than him moving his mouth and speaking the words, or as in the case, again, we're talking about Bashar today, where Daryl Anka allows Bashar to use his physical being to produce the voice coming through. Flint could often be heard talking at the same time the spirit would be talking, to show the proof that there would be a separate larynx apparatus, voice apparatus, in which to provide these sounds. If you Google Leslie Flint, you'll most certainly will come up on this rather unusual photo of this, what looks like a glob, sitting on his shoulder, but that is actually, I've been told, and it's been written about, when you got a much closer look at it, under low light in seance conditions, you could actually see what resembled very much as if you were looking down the human throat, because it was the same type of apparatus.
And he wasn't in trance. He could actually talk while it's going on. He was different than most.
Yes, he was not a trance medium.
Yeah.
He did some trance early on in his career, and found no need for it. And Spirit was able to work through him, and his spirit guides and controls were able to work through him in such a way that trance wasn't necessary. So that also kind of made him somewhat unusual.
And name some of the people that he did. I know Chopin. I listened to maybe 20 different conversations he had with Chopin. And have you got any that aren't on the Leslie Flint sites, like in terms of people that he was talking to that might be significant?
I'm sure that I do, but he had everything from literally common, ordinary, everyday people that had passed over and for whatever reason decided that they wanted to come through in seance. And he also did Chopin. He also did Rudolph Valentino. Yeah. He did a number of celebrities. He did a little bit of Churchill and some of the others. And when you would hear these voices, or if you were to go and visit the Leslie Flint Foundation website, or listen to any of the Manitoba or my archives of Flint, you would notice that the sounds were very, very much like that person sounded when he was alive, which is kind of a trick, because Spirit, when we go back to Spirit, if we actually ever leave it, which I don't think we do, but yeah. when Spirit has a tendency to forget what physical reality was like. And so many times they had to relearn their own human voice in order to come through and speak in such a way that it would be convincing that this actually did sound like, for instance, Valentino. And he must have done 8-10 hours of Valentino stuff. And part of the reason for that was when Leslie Flint first started out as a young boy, he was in a theater usher. Okay. And Valentino was always on the screen, and so he got to not only make a few pence here and there, he also got to see the movies, and he became a huge Valentino fan. So it was one of the primary reasons I think that he and Valentino could find that telepathic connection in order to make the conversations happen. And yet, Grant, they were conversations. They weren't, as we get in a physical mediumship seance these days. You get more of a medium does his thing, and Spirit comes through, and there may be some short conversations, but typically a Leslie Flint, if it was a Zoom conference, it would look like this. Yeah.
Bunch of people going at the same time.
Right.
And he had that little kid that would come in at the beginning, and they would have the conversation with that little kid that started it all the time.
Yeah, he had 2 or 3 of the little MCs, but Mickey was his particular MC. Yeah. And he would come through now, and that's a very typical example of the type of people that Flint would bring through, because Mickey was I think he was like a 13 or 14-year-old paper boy that got run over by a trolley or something, something like, it's funny. And he decided that he'd come back. So when he comes back, he sounds like a little boy.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk like a little boy. His subject matter and his conversations are that of a full-grown man. But he comes through in spirit, sounded very much like a young child.
Now, I only became aware of physical voice mediumship just maybe in the last year, and you've been way ahead. you had some stuff. You sent me a videotape one time of another medium. I don't remember who the medium was, but you had one where the medium is there and the voice is moving around, and they had that detector on the wall. Can you tell that story?
Oh, yeah, right. I believe that was Michael Shane.
Okay.
That is one of the other internationally traveling physical mediums today. And what they had done with Shane is, no, it was Kai Mugi, matter of fact.
Oh,
And what they had done with it is they had set up in different places speakers so that you could detect where in the seance room the voice was coming from, because the voices will have a tendency to move around. And this made proof because they could record which speaker or which microphone was getting the greatest gain. They could then say, oh, you know, the voice is over here, it's moved over here. And matter of fact, actually, when they were doing it, the spirit would play around, it would shoot across the room and say, I'm over here, and then shoot
yeah.
back over to the medium, so I'm over here, just to prove that the voices could move about in the seance room with impunity.
Yeah, that was very dramatic when you watch that, because I remember he said, "What's that thing on the wall?" And then they said, "Well, that's to pick up your voice." And he said, "Like right here, I'm right here in front of the mic," and you see it in front of the mic. And he said, "No, I'm over here." And he said, "He's by the box." And it was. I wish they would do that more often, because it's pretty dramatic when you see. That's almost like a scientific validation that the voice is actually not coming from the medium.
Yeah, it's probably as close as we have had to date. I'm like you, Grant. I'd like to see us push for a lot more science-based examination of physical mediumship in the seance room. We know how to do this better now than we have before. I'll tell you something that came up the other day in another interview I did, Grant. I meant to mention this to you, but I don't know if you know Janet and Sasha Lesson.
Yes, yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay, well, Sasha, you know, has got a medical background,
Yep.
and he and I were talking about this very same thing. And he said, you know, why don't you take a set of wireless EEG nodes and put them on your physical medium? You can then put the person in another room because of the light issues. You have a dark seance, and you need to keep it darkened or in low red light.
Yeah.
Put them in another room where they can monitor what's going on, see what happens with the electrical activity pre-trance and during trance.
Yeah.
And, you know, I got to thinking about that, and I haven't checked into it as much as I like, but that's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah,
I
I
think,
agree with you. I agree, because I don't know if you're familiar with the work was done by Andrew Newberg, where he takes, for example, now light language is a big thing, and people are going like, no, they're making this up or whatever. And he did the old style, which was the speaking in tongues, and he actually put these people in MRIs, and he monitored them, and it's the same as a medium. So he did mediums, he did people who pray, he did people who are doing um, like the channeling and stuff like that. And he'd put them, and he would see the brain, and the brain actually changes. And that's kind of like the DNA thing, where you can actually say, okay, this is before and this is after. And if you think you can fake it, come in and let's see where are you up, and see if you can make the same brain pattern. Because the frontal lobes all shut down, the parietal lobes light up, and it was basically the same pattern, whether you were praying or whether you were doing speaking in tongues or whether you're meditating and stuff. You would see these brain patterns, and it would always be the same brain pattern, which basically confirmed whatever they're doing, they're actually doing it. Now, whereas most people will say the medium's making it up, it's all fake or whatever. And I guess we got to go, and I think you and Kevin are working on that, trying to get like this, a facility where you actually get rated on 5 stars or whatever as to how clean is your mediumship and how much controls you have over it, so that people that are coming in know that this is a legitimate performance that's going on.
there are a couple of organizations, one of which Kevin actually was, I believe he was, we're talking about Kevin Lee, Reverend Kevin Lee, for those that don't know what we're talking about. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm in Southwest Florida. He's in Fort Lauderdale, which is across the peninsula. And we have all of the seances, for the most part, over there in Fort Lauderdale. And Kevin kind of runs that show over there. But yeah, we're looking at that. And he either was or is one of the directors of ASSMPI, which is an organization that is trying to do exactly what you're saying, Grant. They're trying to rate mediums. They're trying to rate them for ability, clairvoyance, accessibility, all types of different things that would give them a star rating or some type of thumbs up, thumbs down type of thing. What they're really trying to do primarily is to get rid of all the fakes, because they know the fakes aren't going to come get tested with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so by elimination, all you get are good testing results. They haven't been as aggressive as I wish they had been. But then again, they're not a particularly well-funded organization. There's just not a lot of people that know much of anything about physical mediumship.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to get a lot of public interest in doing a Patreon or any other type of donations for this. But we're hopeful that that will continue. And in the light of the Bashar conversation we're going to have today, as you know, Grant, Daryl Anka, who is the gentleman who channels Bashar, has gone through this EEG testing himself and has produced it. And you can go online and put in Daryl Anka EEG, and you'll come up with his test results, which show just exactly that. As soon as he goes into trance and Bashar starts to come through, there is a different set of neurological mechanisms working than when he is pre-trance state or in his regular Daryl Anka state. It's really interesting stuff. It does live a lot of scientific credibility to it. I'd like to see some more of it. Maybe we will.
Yeah, maybe you and I should work on a paper just to list all the potentials of things that you could possibly do to verify it. Because basically, and we discussed this with the DNA experiment, is that it basically becomes like a doctor's certificate. You can't practice unless you can pass whatever the test is. You get a definitive test, and if you can't, then you might as well not practice, because nobody's going to go to you.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd really enjoy working on that. And I think there's probably a lot longer list. We put our heads together, we probably come up with a list nearly as long as your contact modalities list. Was that 100, 275?
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those you got, but there is. Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. And I would also, I'm pushing Kevin a little bit to see if we can't get Assembly to move off a dead center. Maybe they need some grant money or something that we can come up with and help them move this thing along. But with that said, the idea of physical mediumship, and I've said this before on prior video casts with you guys, I'm not certain that it has a long future.
Is that right?
One of the reasons is there aren't really too many young ones. Kai Mugi is 57, 58.
Yeah.
Warren Kaler's in his 50s. Michael Shane's in his 50s, late 50s. David Thompson, early 50s. So, I mean, these guys are not spring chickens. And this stuff has a tendency, this physical mediumship has a tendency to really wear you out. It's apparently emotionally draining. It certainly is physically draining. Now, often after a seance, you just let your physical medium just disappear for a while he just tries to get his act back together. He's so physically drained. And of course, he's been in trance this whole time, so he doesn't know what's going on. Everybody wants to talk to him. He wants to get away. It becomes kind of a problem, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, that'd be a great paper to work on. I'd enjoy doing that with you.
Yeah, I'd like to work on that, especially when I saw the one when you sent me the video of the voice moving around where you actually were tracking the voice. I mean, that's pretty dramatic when you watch it and you go like, wow, that's pretty significant, where you got some sort of validation that this voice is moving around the room and everybody's holding hands in the dark and this voice is moving around the room. It's pretty dramatic stuff. So let's work on that. Let's go to Bashar now. You've got a huge collection of Bashar material. You've been collecting for how long? Since he started in the mid 80s?
Oh, I don't think it was quite that far back. There was a period of time, mid 80s, I think 83 was the first public Bashar sitting. When I say public, I'm talking about he sat with like 5 or 6 or 7 friends.
Yeah.
And some of the earliest ones didn't get recorded at all. Some did. It's kind of a hit and miss proposition in finding his stuff these days, because Daryl Anka has really laid down the law on copyright.
Yeah.
But up between, say, 1987 to maybe 2012 or something like that, you could find Bashar materials on YouTube and other people's websites, and everybody seemed to have something a little different. Maybe they were involved in a session, maybe they knew somebody else who had a copy of something. There was a lot of sharing of going on, and I got right in the middle of that and started creating a library of material that people could pop in and actually, borrow or make copies of. And this was, again, before there was any real issue with the copyright. About 2012 or 2013 or so, Daryl and Bashar both came through and said, "Look, guys, this has got to stop. This material is copyrighted. It's getting perverted. People are taking bits and pieces of things out and using them to prove this point or that point. It wasn't meant to say that." And he felt like the only way to keep the purity of the Bashar message was to keep it only in the hands of those that are fortunate enough or willing to pay for the material. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of Bashar sharing going on. I can tell you there is. And there are places that you can go and get just about everything that you possibly could imagine available in audio and video from Bashar. It's out on the internet, and I don't need to tell anybody where to go. They can find it themselves. But the material is still there. But the copyright is a very, very pungent issue, I should say, with Daryl. And so consequently, these days, if you don't know a Bashar sharing group or have some friends who have a copy of this or that or bought one, it's expensive to get new Bashar material.
Yeah. Can I ask you, because you've done the physical mediumship, and we got a question on physical mediumship. Can you go through some of the, whether it was Leslie Flint or whether it's David Thompson or Kai, some of the methods that are used, like with the gagging and the tie straps and stuff like that, to sort of try to validate the fact that this is legitimate? Because there's all the skeptics. You always have to play to the skeptics all the time.
Yeah, and let me tell you something. The skeptics, and you'll find this out, Grant. Keep our prayers in line that this COVID horribleness goes away and that you're able to come down and sit in seance.
Yeah.
But once you sat in a seance, it's not really an issue of is something paranormal or supernatural happening there. It's the questions now become where's it coming from and how's it being done. It's not being done by the medium, so you may want to have an argument that it isn't spirit or it is ET or whatever, but it's something outside of physical reality that is creating the experiences in the seance. But and I lost your question.
No, it was just what kind of restraints are, like you're talking about tie straps and like with where especially with Leslie Flint, where they do this stuff where they put water in the mouth or they gag the guy and all these kind of things, or put a microphone to the neck or to see if the larynx is moving.
Yeah, today's physical mediums, and there's only 4 or 5 of them that travel. 4 of the 5 of them have a restraint that is physical. In other words, they have legs that are bound to the chair that they sit in the cabinet being just a small curtained off space with a black curtain typically in front of it. They'll have a chair in there that they can sit on because they want to have something that they can physically tie themselves down to. So it's not unusual to see them being zip tied to their wrists being zip tied to the arms of a chair, the legs being strapped in. Kai Mugi is the only one who doesn't do that, but he has a more unique way. It's called the German way of doing things, German physical mediumship. And he has sitters on each side of him holding him during the seance. So one will have a hand on his knee, another will have a hand on his arm. They'll keep up with that during the entire seance, and they will tell you from time to time, I still have his left arm. I'm going to reach over and touch his right arm. In other words, they're assuring you that medium is staying in the chair and that the phenomenon that you're experiencing is wholly because of the mediumship and not any type of quackery or fakery.
One question I wanted to ask, and you've told it before, but I'd like to maybe the people who haven't heard this story before, I look at the crossovers between UFOs and physical mediums, and one of the more bizarre ones is, and we actually have one here in Winnipeg. Desta may know him. His name is Jim. And Jim's had a number of experiences over the years with orbs in the room. He was healed of cancer. He has all these encounters and stuff like that. And he, from time to time, he finds himself waking up in the morning with his t-shirt inside out and backwards. And so you told the story of David Thompson. Can you tell that story about David Thompson, how they seem to be doing almost the same thing, like they're showing off and saying, watch what we can do?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you call it, the wow factor. I think
Yeah.
the theory of wow, is that right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. David Thompson has a little bit of a different physical mediumship. It's very structured, and so this is a spoiler alert for anyone who's thinking about or going to a David Thompson concert. I mean, a seance.
Seance, yeah.
Yeah, is that he's ended every one that I've ever been to, and I guess I've been to half a dozen or so. In that, when he enters the cabinet to begin with, and everybody comes and checks him out, literally, you pat him down, you open his mouth, you do whatever you want to do to check the room and whatnot. You make sure that he hasn't got anything on him, and then he puts on a cardigan sweater, and the cardigan sweater is the old type that buttons down the front with the big buttons, and he takes that, and then what they do to assure that the cardigan is staying on his body is they put little zip ties in each of the holes. So not only is it buttoned, but it's zip tied to it. So, I mean, it's not coming off. And then they put him in the cabinet. You go through the seance. We do all the different things. 2 hours, it's over with. And Spirit is ready to end the seance. And they lift him up out of the cabinet and deposit him about 6 to 10 feet out in the middle of the floor. You hear him go kerplunk on a wooden mat that's out there. And then when the lights come on, and he is bound and gagged and tied to this chair, and so you get the ball out of his mouth and the bandana from around his head, and you look down and you find out that they have taken his cardigan sweater and reversed it so that the buttons are running up the back and the zip ties are still in there. So in order to do this, Spirit has to do two things. One, they have to obviously dematerialize the zip ties and dematerialize the jacket, because there's no way of getting this cardigan sweater off of him because he's bound to the chair unless they just literally physically remove it from him, spin it around, rematerialize the zip ties, rebutton the cardigan sweater down the back, and kick him out to the middle of the seance room floor. And it's really dramatic, and it's funny too, to see this, because it's such an unusual thing. And it's your wow factor. This is them saying, look at what we can do. We can materialize and dematerialize and rematerialize physical objects in your reality. We have complete control over this medium, whether he's in trance, as David Thompson is in trance during this whole period of time, doesn't know any of this is going on. And they do it just for that. It's just the phenomena factor. It's one of the things that sets physical mediumship aside from any other kind of mediumship, in that it has a spectacular show flavor to it. That's why I said a concert. I was thinking about the show aspect of this, because there's music in these physical mediumship seances. There's music being played by Spirit. And then you have these absolutely unusual phenomenal occurrences, which basically say, if you can't believe that, the medium is not involved in this, explain this to me. How in the world could this possibly happen unless there was something paranormal or supernatural going on?
David Thompson brings in Louis Armstrong. Have you seen this, where Louis Armstrong shows up and comes and sings and walks around the room?
Yeah, and David does this a little bit differently. He has in the center of his floor a couple of 6x10 wooden plywood planks that he puts there. So you can actually hear the spirits when they come out of the cabinet, ectoplasmically covered. They're covered in ectoplasm, but you can hear them walk. And since David's seance circle is up to 40 at a time, it's a pretty large horseshoe. they'll walk from one end of the horseshoe to the other, the cabinet being at the open end of the horseshoe, and they will approach sitters all the way at the far end of the horseshoe, which my last time I sat there, uh, I was at the far end and had one of the spirit controls, who we kind of know each other by now, come over and have some conversation with you. But you can hear them walk, and they will put their hands on your head, and you can feel the warmth of the. You can hear them breathe. Uh, the the exuding of the ectoplasm is something in David Thompson's seance. It's just absolutely mind-boggling, because it sounds like somebody just opened the drain on the biggest tub in the world, because he goes, you can hear this stuff. And I think I've sent you a couple of things, Grant. If not, I'll see if I can't find a clip that you can share with everybody that will attest to the loudness and the unusualness of the ectoplasm when it is being exuded and covered these spirits as they come out to have conversation with you.
Wow. I got a question, because I have the same idea with the experiencers talking about beings coming. They'll be balls of light, and they'll come in. And if you saw the interview I did with Sherry Wild, she claims that she's on board the ship at 15 or 16, and they bring in Albert Einstein, Albert Schweitzer, and Nikola Tesla. And I asked her the question. I said, well, were they actually physical? And she says, I know you're going with this, and it may have been a hologram, but it was really real. So I want to ask you, in terms of, and this is something I think people have to realize, is this idea that it's a spirit phenomena, but it can manifest into what would appear to be very physical beings that when they touch you, it feels like a real human being, correct?
Yeah, it really does. William, who is the spirit control for David Thompson, I mean, I've had him come over and stand on my feet. So to show you that he's got shoes on.
Wow.
And to put his hand on my head, and he'll ask you, he'll say, can you feel my hand? Now, remember, we're in a darkened seance room, so what we're really doing is reporting what's happening between William and myself, or William and any other sitter. So you're always talking out loud, telling everybody else what's happening. So it's, yeah, I feel your hand on my head, and he'll ask me what it feels like, and it feels like it's warm. And it was a very, very big hand. William was a pretty big guy in real life. And you just go through the whole thing, and different people will get different touches and different types of examples of the fact that this is spirit coming from the spirit realm, manifesting into physical reality, using ectoplasm as the cover to enjoin this capability, and that they are very, very real people. You can ask them very real questions about their time. William happened to be somewhere in the 1750s, I think, or so. Nobody particularly notable.
Yeah.
But you get to ask him, questions about how things were back then. And matter of fact, one of the things I asked him one time is, as he was going back to the cabinet so that the next spirit could come out, because in David Thompson's seances, spirits typically come out one by one. Other seances, you may have 3 or 4 spirits in the room at any one particular time. But David's have more of a traditional theatrical style. And so it's sort of like a one-act plays. And they come out one by one. And as they do this, you can have different conversations with different spirits about different parts in their lives and what it was like. And they will tell you about what their life is like now. But one thing that had happened, because I was thinking about the same thing, and this was probably back in 2012 or so, something like that. And William comes out and he does his thing, and he's going back to the cabin, so to let the next spirit come out. And he's walking right by me because I'm sitting right next to the cabin. And he says he apparently telepathically understood that I had another question, and in fact, let me make this point to you, Grant. If we get to make that David Thompson seance in October, get yourself 1 or 2 questions and stick it in your head.
Okay.
Because if you're as fortunate as I was, William is walking by. He had no reason to stop and say anything. He'd already talked and already put his hand on me and stood on my toes and did all that. And he's walking by and he says, I believe you have a question. And I said, yeah, I actually do have one. I have one that I don't think has been asked. So, but can you tell me what you know about extraterrestrials?
Yeah.
And I was really surprised with his response. I thought he would say something like, oh, well, we know they're there, or, we don't have any, we don't have any vibrational compatibility with them or something like that. Instead, he says, well, there's many planets, and as big as the universe is, I'd be surprised if there was another life, but no, I've never met an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
And that really said to me that there's this idea of frequency, vibration, and resonance. These are the barriers that prevent us and the spirit world from communicating as easily as we might. And apparently it prevents other realms from communicating with each other. So the extraterrestrial realm, as far as William's concerned, he's not surprised. Now, he came from the 1700s where ETs weren't even in a conversation back then, I'd imagine. But he is also smart enough to know that there's life elsewhere. He's sure that that's the case. He has no experience with it. And that really set me back, because as we're investigating and are investigating, is spirit ET, is ET spirit?
Yeah.
In fact, aren't you writing a book on that?
Yeah.
Extraterrestrials?
Yeah. Like, what are we really dealing with? Is extraterrestrials, or maybe not? It's like the more complex, the more you look at it, the more complex the whole thing seems to be, as to we're just making a bunch of assumptions that are probably wrong. That is a very complex process as to who these people are and what they're doing.
Well, I think that the best that we can do, and I figured this would come up in conversation, the Bashar conversation as well. I'm thoroughly convinced that the only way that we can connect with spirit and extraterrestrials is through analogy. That they live such an entirely different life, a non-physical, quasi-dimensional life, that there's really no way for them to explain this to us. If you listen to channeled information, I listen to a lot of it, you'll hear this constantly from people coming through that are channeling. They will come through and say, well, we'll give this to you in your terms, or we'll explain it to you in a way that you'll understand it. And what they're telling us is not that we're stupid, is that we're limited. And that that's why we're here in physical reality, to have a physical reality experience in a very limited way, in the way that we choose, but nonetheless very limited. And that those limitations also mean that our ability to understand the supernatural, the paranormal, the unusual, the esoteric is also limited. So we deal mostly with analogies and assumptions, rather than trying to deal with the real physics that are involved in some of these spirits and extraterrestrial communications. And Bashar will be the first that will bring this out. I've probably got 300 or 400 audio and video sessions of his, and at some point I've listened to every one of them, probably every one of them twice or three times for that matter. Yes, I have a boring life. But he'll tell you that we're going to have this conversation, but it's going to be, you can see him fighting for the words. It's almost like an adult trying to tell a little child something that's over his head.
Yeah.
He's trying to find some way to make this work, at the adolescent level. And Bashar does an excellent job of this. I mean, he's, that's what he is. He's a first contact specialist. His family is first contact specialists. He's here because he's setting up first contact. This is what he's trained to do. This is his passion. This is what he wants to do. He enjoys this immensely. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it. And he has gotten better and better and better over the years at being able to explain his own existence, his own reality, the reality of others, the universe and how it works and the like. But it's almost always by analogy, or by an assumption, or by something that we might have even considered to be correct that he knows is not correct, but it's in the collective consciousness right now as a truth. And he will say, okay, well, let's go with your truth on this.
Yeah.
It's just his kind of way of saying it ain't true, but we'll go with this. You know, we'll go with this for right now and see where it leads us. But yes, I think that's exactly what's happening.
I want to ask you a question. I've heard you talk about it in other interviews, but you've never discussed it with me. How you got, because you got a massive collection on all these type of paranormal phenomena. You spent a lot of time. How did you get involved? And can you tell the story about the woman with the apport? I've heard you tell this story about you were in New York City with the woman that made the documents appear.
Oh me, okay. Well, first, how I got into it, and then I'll get back to that. Hold that second question. That's a fun story.
Yeah.
The how I got into all this is I became an avid Harry Potter fan, and was reading all the books and watching all the movies and all that stuff, and really got into it. And I was always curious as to where J.K. Rowling got this whole idea from, and come to find out it's all channeled information.
Yeah.
She got a Grant Cameron download.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hers happened to be sitting on a city bus, I think, or something, And
well, she was on a train going into London. I remember she told the story to Oprah, how she's suddenly came into her head and she didn't have any paper, and all the names and the places were coming in. She had no paper and she was freaking out. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, and that's that I went, what is this? What is this kind of stuff? And so I started looking at the Potter stuff, and I started thinking, well, what is magic? I mean, what really is magic? Is it supernatural? Is it something that we should be able to do but can't? What exactly is magic? And as I got involved in that, as you go about doing your typical Google search, it starts you here, you end up over there. Next thing I know, I'm looking at channeled information because of J.K. Rowling's experience. I'm looking at physical mediumship, mental mediumship, all kinds of psychism, all of that, and then eventually into spirit contact and spirit communications. And that's how that all came about. It's just typical learning process. You start with A, you end up at Z.
Yeah.
And in the process and travel in between is where you get all the education. But she was, she held on to that story for a long time.
Yeah.
I think the first time she ever told that story was on Oprah.
Yeah.
Publicly. She
Yeah.
may have said it in print someplace, but never in a national or international interview like that.
Yeah.
That it became something that she basically channeled. Now, I don't know if that continued through the whole septology of books. If every one was channeled, I got a feeling it was sort of like being on a roll, and you get some channeled information, and now the rest of it just kind of comes to you.
Yeah.
And there's a great argument that says that's channeling anyway.
Yeah.
The fact that she didn't get a dump of a download and had a stream of consciousness that allowed her to produce the magnificent works of the Harry Potter series,
yeah.
Is testament to the way that channeling can work, which is it can be a very continuous, long, ongoing process. I don't know about her newer stuff, Fantastic Beasts and some of the others, how all that came about, but she was adamant after the Oprah interview about saying, look, this came to me in just a boom. And like you said, I had all the names, I had the places. I may not have had all the details, but it was going to be a castle. It was going to be a boy. He was going to be 11 and on and on. And that's how that whole thing came about.
Yeah. And so now tell the story. I'm going to plug my computer in and tell the story about the apport thing, because that's a fascinating story of the woman in New York City.
Well, my wife and I were taking a cruise that repositioned from Miami, Florida to New York City. And my wife has never been a big fan of the city, and I've always been a big fan. And I kept trying to get her to fly up there with me, go to Broadway and whatever. And she never would do it. So I said, well, it was a combination of the flight. She's not great about flying, and going into Manhattan can be little bit hair raising. You know, Manhattan's one of the few places you can walk down one street, have a great time, walk down the next street, and get robbed. So, you know, I mean, literally, I've done that. We used to have a place, a company that I worked for up there, and it was on 52nd, and you could walk down 3 streets, and the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a heroin war zone. Yet this apartment was $1 million apartment. So, but it's always like, and she doesn't, you know, get off on that kind of thing. So I said, well, let's do this. And I said, while I'm there, I can visit this friend of mine. Well, I had met this lady, and I'm just going to use her first name, and I'll tell you why. Her name is Gail. And the reason I'm using her first name is because she is, at this present time, incarcerated here in Florida.
Oh.
And it's a little bit of a long story, but we can end up with it. But how this worked out was that I was writing software for the intelligence community, in particular the naval intelligence community, and not particularly complicated software. It was just tracking people where they are, if they're on the base or off the base, and believe it or not, they don't know. So this would help them keep up with, you know, and this came out of one of the hurricanes, the Rita Katrina duo that hit Florida back in mid 2000s. Found Navy medical personnel scattered because it was during the summer. They were scattered on vacation. They couldn't pull everybody back. Reminds you a lot of what's going on today with COVID. Is one of the problems that they're having is they have people that have been out on vacation or away, and they're having to, you know, trying to find these people. They have no way of knowing that outside of calling up their, you know, parents or their daughter or whatever. And this wasn't going to work if you need immediate deployment. So we did a tracking system and the like. And during that period of time, I made a lot of other intelligence connections, and this particular intelligence connection had a piece of software that would allow you to transfer money, probably illegally, outside of the U.S. banking system. It was sort of its own point-to-point transfer. Today, that doesn't sound like much. This is way before PayPal or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so we were doing some work on that software as well. And they said, well, I got somebody I want you to meet. And I said, okay. So I was going over to middle Alabama. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm 250 miles away. We'll go over there and meet with my intelligence guy and this new person he wants me to meet. So we meet up and we have a nice meeting and just talk about this, you know, monetary stuff that he's doing and some other software we're working on. And I really didn't understand what it was all about. Gail's in this meeting. And come to find out, after the meeting is over with, we're all going to get back in the cars and go home. And I said, well, where do you live, Gail? She says, well, I live in such and such. Well, that's like 4 minutes from my house in Atlanta. I was like, you're kidding me. I said, what are we coming all the way over here for? You know, why do we have this over in Atlanta? And she said, well, I don't know. So because she was close by and one of the intelligence contacts, she had invited me to come and eat lunch with her a few times, meet a few of her contacts. She had a really unusual background. She was a presidential model, taken from birth. I think she was 3 years old when they took her to the various schools that she went to, which tested her psychic abilities. And she was a truly remarkable psychic. But we were in New York and she had a 2-story Manhattan apartment. And she said, why don't you come down? We were staying out at Central Park. So why don't you come down and visit me? And I said, okay, that'd be great. So I get in the cab, I get down to her place, get up there. We say hello, you know. So why is it we always have to travel 500 miles, you know, to see each other? And she said, oh, and we just, you know, we were enjoying each other's companies and whatnot. And I went, oh, damn. Gail, I forgot this block of papers that I want you to look at. I don't even remember what the subject and content of the papers was, but it was important to the meeting. And I said, I'll just run back and get them. It only takes about 30 minutes. I'll catch a cab and come back. She goes, well, wait a minute. She said, did you bring, are you sure you brought them? And I said, oh, I'm positive I brought them. I know exactly where I left them. I can see them in my head sitting on top of my briefcase in our hotel room, top of the suitcase. And I just forgot to grab it when I came out. And so she walked over to this table, just a little card table, you know, sitting there. And she takes her hands and she places them 6 inches above the table at the maximum, 3 inches maybe, not touching the table. And I'll be damned if those papers didn't materialize right there. And I mean, I've already been to a few seances and whatnot. This was still a shocker. I just went, what? And not only was it a, not only was it the papers, it was the papers. They were copies. An apport by definition is a copy of something.
Yeah.
An assport by definition is the physical moving of an object from one place to another, say for your home to a seance room or whatever. Yeah. So she assported these papers. And, you know, the meeting, I mean, from there on, the meeting went to hell. I mean, you know, it just, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot. You know, that was the climax as far as I was concerned. The rest of the conversation was like, how'd you do that? You know? And she says, I don't know. I've always had this ability to manifest documents. And she said, matter of fact, when I was working with General Haig, and she wasn't working with him as much as she was cohabiting with him, she said they would often have me come in. She said, I'll give you, for example, I was able to find and produce locally documents showing that it was either the South or the North Koreans at the time were moving guns and moving them illegally. She was able to come up with the bills of lading and other evidence by manifesting those documents that were in the hands of officials, finding them and manifesting them and bringing them to, this case, Army intelligence. So they found out somehow when she was really, really young. She was half Lakota. Somehow intelligence got tripped to her abilities even before she was necessarily demonstrating much of those abilities. And they took her and put her into different and various schools and exposed her to different and various intelligence situations, which is, by the way, how she ultimately ended up getting incarcerated.
Wow.
Is that she was raising millions and millions of dollars for Black Ops intelligence. And they've apparently got to the point where they felt like they no longer needed her or wanted her to do so. She was spending some of the money that she was taking in on some lavishments. She was trying to set up a single virtual nation for all indigenous cultures. She actually had an associate seat at the United Nations.
Wow.
So she was heavily involved in this and in the raising of money to do this. The indigenous culture that she was wanting to create a virtual nation and have a seat at the UN was also a cover for dollars that were flowing in that were being washed out through her system that were going out into other areas of Black operations. And she got caught with her hand in the till, I guess is about the best way to say it. But I think I think she got framed for it. I think that this is something she'd been doing a long, long time. And for whatever reasons, they decided that this was enough and they didn't want anything to do with her. She and an associate got very long federal penitentiary sentences. She's got another 4 or 5 years to go, and I think hers was 14 or 15 years for her part of this so-called scheme.
Wow. But she's pretty old now, apparently, right?
Yeah, Gail's probably, she was a couple of years older than I was, so she's probably early 70s or so. But she had lived this life through her entire life of working with the various intelligence agencies, some of which she refused to even discuss. She once time told me, she said, you can go and find 15, maybe 20 intelligence agencies. She said, I can give you 3 right now that you'll never find anywhere, that I don't even know who they're associated with. She had some guesses, but these people would show up at her house and say, come on, let's go take a ride.
Wow.
And off she would go. Having kids, having a marriage, and having been in that area of the intelligence and knowing all the things that she knew made her as much as an asset as a liability. And I think at some point they finally said she's more of a liability than the asset.
Wow. Now that leads to the question, and I'm going to go to Sinead for a question, but that leads to the question we always have, this debate inside the UFO community, and what does the government actually know? Are they advanced in any sort of technologies, or do they understand mediumship? Are they trying to use this? Are they trying to use psychics? Because there's this debate that they know nothing, and there's a debate, well, they're flying to Mars and to star systems. And so what do you think, just your personal guess as to how far advanced is the US government in terms of understanding sort of the core issues of spirituality and quantum physics and how this all operates? Do they have any control of what's going on in technology?
Well, you have to separate out the government from the intelligence agencies.
Okay.
And then from the intelligence agencies, you have to separate out all the black operations that are happening. Those things that are really deep black ops are happening mostly at the corporate level these days.
Yeah.
They have been moved out of the traditional CIAs, NSAs, etc., FBIs. They've moved that out of there into the corporate controlled and corporate dominated black operations field. So when you say to me, what do they know about consciousness? What do they know about interstellar travel? All these different things. You have to kind of hone in on what agency are you talking about and what part of the government are you talking about. Now, my black ops contacts are not anywhere near as strong as they used to be. So I can only relate to you what I'm hearing secondhand and what I did see and understand to be the case 5 and 6, 7 years ago. It would not surprise me at all. I'd be more surprised if we weren't making clandestine trips to other planets, to asteroids, to the dark side of the moon. I'd be very surprised if that isn't happening. That's the black ops at NASA, let's call it. As far as the conventional government is concerned, they just kind of they get to the point with ideas like mediumship and consciousness in general, and it just falls off the cliff for them. They just don't have the mindset to get their hands around that. So if you're looking to, for instance, find a black operations agency that has the same kind of craft that Bashar does, which is driven by consciousness. You walk up to a panel and basically say, I want to go here, or I want to go there. And it goes. Because you're empathically linked to the craft. This isn't anything that I think is happening. I don't think we understand that in any way, shape, or form, other than by theory. Now, if you're talking about flying wings, large, huge, TR-3B type, flying wings, I'd be very surprised if we didn't have that technology. But I would also be floored to find out that they were consciously driven craft as opposed to some type of what we would call normal or regular propulsion. Now, keep in mind, Bashar's craft is grown. And it is grown in such a way that it meets with his higher mind, his consciousness, so that they become sort of like an artificial intelligence, something like a being in and unto itself. That's a whole lot different than sitting at a joystick, and some rudders and flying even the largest and most imaginative craft that we think are flying in our airs. That I don't think is a threshold that has been crossed. And I'm not so certain that we're going to cross that threshold very soon, I would almost have to say that we'll have first contact, hard interfaced contact with extraterrestrial life before we learn or get taught that consciousness, a melding and joining situation for travel. Now, the other part of this is that, as Bashar will tell you, is that there's lots of different ways of getting from one location to the next. For instance, you and I want to go to the store, we get in our car, or we walk, or whatever, okay? Bashar wants to go from one dimension to another. Or let's just say he's on Jupiter and he wants to come to Earth. He doesn't fire up his craft and, take 115 light years to get here. What he does is he changes something that we don't know anything about. And I'm working with some physicists on this right now, and they're just looking at me like I'm crazy, but this is how this works. Bashar, as an Essassani being, and other extraterrestrials, I believe, also have this ability. They see an object as having a location variable. So, as these two beautiful women are sitting there, they are objects, but they are part of what is who they are, is where they're sitting, the location that they are in. So Bashar says, now, if I want to go from location A to location B, all I have to have is I have to know what the resonance is, the frequency is of the object at location A. And I need to know what the frequency is of the location object at location B. And let's say it's the same exact object. And then you just take that object in location A, impart that frequency of location B on there, and it moves. It can't do anything else except exist in location B, and vice versa. You want to bring it back, you reverse the frequency. So they have non-propulsive methods of traveling. And when that came out, when he started talking about location variables and that, it completely blew away all the people that wanted to say, well, there's no way they can get here because it'd be 6,000 light years and blah, blah, blah. And you can't cross dimensions because, whatever the excuse is that the extraterrestrials are not coming and flying around in our skies on a daily basis. They can't be here. They couldn't, especially if they were from Zeta Reticuli. William Trinet and Paul Hamden bring through the Zeta beams. And they talk about the same type of location variables that are involved in it. They use different terminology, but it's basically the same thing. It's all about the frequency and the resonation of where you are. Every object, be it human or non-human, object has a location and a variable in its equation, in its energetic equation that indicates where it is and how it is to exist. Change it, you can change anything, including you can change the matter of an object as well.
Now, I'm going to give one more question, then I'll give it to Sinead. In terms of this, because she's talking about like an equation where you change the one variable in the equation, and it's basically the location is one of the variables in the equation. So I forgot my question.
See, it took off.
It took off, yeah. I know where it is. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'll let Sinead take a question because she had a question. I think she wants to go back to physical mediumship, and then I'll remember what my question is.
Okay, thanks, Grant. And Walter, thanks so much for talking to us today. This is such a rich conversation and really interesting. And I have two questions, but I also have something I just want to say about what you just said regarding location and variables and frequency, and finding an object by using those parameters. That reminds me of remote viewing, which I know the government is very familiar with, right? A remote viewer's body can be in California, but their mind goes to where the location is based on being given a set of numbers and other details, not much, but some details that help them hone in on the location of whatever it is they're trying to find. So that's kind of interesting, the parallel between those two concepts. I have a couple of questions for you. The first question is pretty simple, so I'll start with that one. Talking about the physical aspects of the seance experience, when the medium you were describing how the medium will be very restrained, their hands are restrained, they're tied to a chair, their eyes are covered, their mouth is covered. When the medium is finished with the seance and the lights are turned on and everything is coming back to normal. Does the medium ever say that they're aware of their clothing being turned inside out or backwards at the moment that that's happening to them? Do they know? Like, can they feel the clothing moving? Do they have any kind of experience when that's going on?
No, they're in such a deep trance that there's only one medium that I know of that says anything about his knowing this during the seance. In other words, what he senses is going on. And it's very, very, very vague. The rest of the trance mediums have no idea at all what's going on. They literally go into trance.
Okay.
And then later on emerge out of trance, and it's just like you've got 2 hours of dead time.
Okay. Thank you. And my second question is about, again, sort of a physical aspect of the seance experience. So you were talking earlier about how a spirit can arrive and then physically touch people that are in the seance, interact with them physically, give them objects, things like that. Do you, in terms of the touch of the spirit, or the spirit becoming a physical material thing in the room in whatever way, does that happen? I have two sort of ways I'm thinking about this, and I wonder if it's one or the other, or probably both. Does that happen deliberately, like the spirit is choosing to manifest that way as a way of communicating with the people in the room? And or is it because the spirit is coming into this particular vibration and this particular density, and therefore the physicality, like the physical manifestation, is sort of an accidental side effect of coming into this vibration and this density with us? What would you say to that?
Yes, both.
Okay.
They understand that when they leave the higher vibrational realm that we typically call the spirit realm, that they have a lowering of their own vibration that is required. And once they lower their vibration, they, in essence, come into physical reality as it matches up and resonates with it. So there is the intent of wishing to be involved in the seance. There is the physics involved, which is that they have to get into a vibrational realm that is compatible with physical reality. And there is that transformation that they are part of in the process, by creating the process and by adhering to the process. What they don't tell us about very much, and makes this a very good question, is, let's say spirit's in the spirit realm and he now wants to come into seance. How do they actually make that transition? How does that work? Do they just think themselves into it? Do they have a physical or a emotional mechanism that lowers their vibration, and the vibration just takes them where they go? And grant, this would be kind of like the location variable. You change the energetic equation, you're going to end up wherever that energetic equation tells you. I'm thinking it's both. I've never had a conversation, do I know of one, where this has been spoken of at length. But just in all the research and in the conversations around this subject, I think it starts with an intent. There's a consciousness factor, obviously, and ultimately, by the lowering of their vibration, is a necessity for them to come into physical reality. This also is, by the way, why they are covered in ectoplasm. Some very thickly covered, some not so thickly covered. And their touch, when they are ectoplasmically covered, their spirit body comes into this lower vibrational form, what we call physicalness, cover themselves up to protect themselves from our physical reality, especially from light issues that can hamper their own transition into physical reality. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get a balance, I think is the right way of saying it. They're trying to get a balance between those energy points so this kind of happens. But first of all, it requires an intent. Did I answer your question for you?
Yes, it does. And I have a sort of sub question. Have you ever heard of the spirits or a spirit being just as startled as the humans in the room about making physical contact or having something happen. I mean, there's got to be some spirits that are like, oh, this is old hat. You know, I've been here tons of times. I've met you guys tons of times. You know, whatever. I'm used to this. And then there have to be some spirits that for them it's the first time coming through, and maybe it's just as unfamiliar for them as it is for the people in the room. So does it ever happen where the spirit's kind of surprised at what's occurring, just like the people in the room are?
Yes, yeah. That's always kind of funny, because occasionally you'll get a spirit to pop in, and in the seance, typically there's a spirit controller or a spirit guide that kind of runs the show. So you're not going to get into seance unless you're allowed in by the spirit controller. This keeps out demonic and negative influences, for one thing. But also it limits it, because they will tell you, I got thousands of people here who will come in into the seance. Everybody wants to come in. We aren't going to let certain people in. And usually they have kind of a reason that they let one person in or not. But occasionally they'll get a surprise guest, star. And I had the captain of the Titanic come in to seance. And he was talking about something or other. And the next thing I know, he's talking about things that happened on the Titanic, and you could see it was like somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, you're in seance here. You need to talk to these people over here. I don't think he had any idea that he was in seance. John Lennon came through and sung Imagine to my wife. He barely could be heard because he was so unfamiliar with the environment. And he almost acted as if he was surprised that he was there. And he only sang 2 or 3 or 4 verses. He didn't sing the whole song. So yeah, there are times when spirit shows up that when they didn't expect to. But more often than not, there's a certain amount of organization that happens on the spirit side, a certain amount of theatricality that's involved, so that you don't have 1,000 spirits all trying to talk at the same time and nothing gets done.
Do they ever give each other advice? Like, if one of them is having a hard time coming through, do they give each other advice about how to do that? Are they learning from each other up there?
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, there's a few of the Warren Kaler has 2 spirit guides, and they fight each other over who's going to do what. One of them is named Luther, and the other is named Yellowfeather. As a matter of fact, if you go to Warren Kaler's Facebook page on Sundays, I think Sunday afternoons or evenings, he brings Luther through in direct voice. You can hear what Luther sounds like. And I can tell you, it don't sound anything like Warren Kaler. But they fight among each other. And they'll talk about, well, why did you do that? Well, I thought this was the right thing to do. And, they're carrying on these conversations like, excuse this term, a bunch of old women, and it's partly because it's part of the theatricality. It's part of the comedy of it. It's part of the show. It's part of it, Grant says, the wow factor. It's part of them showing that they're still, in a lot of ways, very, very human. And that they can have, misgivings with one another and fights with one another and those types of things. Look, I got into it with a little spirit by the name of Tommy. And Tommy, when he was alive, was a comedian, a vaudevillian comedian. And so he was used to being pretty raunchy, pretty rugged kind of guy. And he comes into spirit one time, and I'm having a conversation with him about, I don't know what it was. And I said, by the way, Tommy, are you aware that I have a cat named Tommy? Well, he either was playing with me or he misheard me. And he yells out, he goes, you called me a cat? And I said, no, I'm not calling you a cat. I said, I have a cat. And he picked up this styrofoam top, which the medium used to bring in some objects in this styrofoam box, and he threw it and hit me in the head with it. So, I mean, yeah, they've got all of those types of things, and you'll hear them arguing with each other. We had a seance that got canceled because a lady brought in a cell phone. The cell phone went off in the middle of the seance. We couldn't get it turned off. The light came on. You know how cell phone lights come on when they ring. Her light came on. You could see it. And they must have argued for 10 minutes between themselves about whether they were going to continue the seance or not. Well, have you tried this? Well, have you tried? You haven't tried very hard. Why didn't you try this? Well, we can't get any energy back. Well, you're not trying hard enough. I mean, so the conversations like that are both operational in some senses, as well as comedic and part of the interaction that they have.
Let me ask a related question to that. You're talking about the energy, getting the energy back. And I described the situation that happened in Shasta, where everybody decides they're going to go up to the top of the mountain. There's going to be this contact, and suddenly the circle breaks up, and these people all get into cars and trucks, and off they go. And the circle they were going to do a crystal ceremony, and that just the vibration fell. They couldn't get the energy back up. So can you talk a little bit about in seances the use of music and the fact that the participants are part of the show using energy, and that you have to raise the energy in order to get this thing going?
Yeah, and let me preface it by saying this whole vibrational physics is something that we just don't understand a whole heck of a lot about. And I certainly am on the downside of that science curve on that. But every seance that I've ever been in, there's always been camaraderie, holding of hands, singing of songs, all of this having fun was really what they're trying to promote. Raises your vibration. Now, we really don't have a way to measure somebody's vibration. Bashar will tell you, if you ask Bashar, what's my vibration, he'll tell you. He'll say, oh, you're between 135,000 and 165,000 kilohertz. Well, hertz for a second. And whatever it happens to be. He has told us that 333 kilohertz, 333 megahertz, that at that 333 kilohertz, at 333 kilohertz, you disappear. You vibrationally become non-physical. So when he says, oh, your vibration is between this and that, he's talking about your level of following your passion and being excited, and if you're on the right course, and all these things that lend to a higher vibration. We fake that in some ways by creating these instances where we sing, where we sit in seance, we have camaraderie before the seance. We even have a little bit going on during the seance. And all of this friendship and camaraderie and conversation, singing and all of this somehow creates an up vibratory scale for us. And as our vibration comes up, spirit has less vibration to come down to, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to meet them in the middle, kind of. You know, they're not going to get down to, say, 100,000 where we are at, but we can get our vibration up to, as a group, and the collective energy raises the entire vibration of the environment. Spirit has an easier access to us. It's sort of like meeting somebody halfway down the road. You know, you don't have to make them go all the way. You say, I'll meet you halfway. We do it by singing and doing all those types of things that create this higher vibratory environment in the seance room.
How many seances have you actually attended? Because you seem to have pretty wide knowledge about the state of physical mediumship and what's going on. How many of you attended? Quite a few, I think.
Yeah, I'm in the 30-ish range,
Yeah.
I guess. I've sat with every major international physical medium except for Scott Milligan, but Scott hasn't made many trips over here to the United States. And as you know, we're trying to get him over here for a number of reasons, including the DNA experiment grant, which he, by the way, has said he will do. Yeah. He's been ill and has some other things going on. We'll get back to him, and he'll be part of the two DNA experiments that were on physical mediums, other being Kai Mookie. But yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the idea that the and this is where we get into the DNA thing with the trance, where you sort of like a complete dissociation where they don't really know what's going on. So let's go to Bashar, and Bashar talks about this as well, or Dale Ranko talks about this when they ask him, what do you experience? And he sort of describes it like, well, it's sort of like Bashar's driving. I'm sort of there. I can sort of hear stuff. I really don't know what's going on. And you find that one of the people I was thinking about doing was the with the DNA experiment was the people with dissociative identity disorder. the multiple personality disorder. And when you hear these people describe it, they describe it the same way. They say there's different levels. They take over, you're sitting in the front seat, and you can see, you know what's going on, you haven't got no control. Or then they throw you in the back seat, and then they throw you in the trunk and they blindfold you. And then it's this idea. And Bashar talks about this as well. So Mickey, can you talk about your understanding of the levels of trance and how that all works?
Yeah, and it's very independent to each medium how much they understand of the message that they're delivering. The best that I have heard of the trance will say things like, Daryl, I have this vague idea of what's going on, you know, kind of images more than sounds and words. And he says, and Daryl over the years has gotten so much better at being able to put these things together and translate them that at the end of a trance session, when he's through channeling Bashar, he often now will know a lot more than he did when he first started. So he's kind of gone on an education curve, much like Bashar has gone on an education curve. The Bashar that we were getting in 1983 is nowhere near the same as the Bashar that we're getting now. He sounds differently. His vocabulary is better. Daryl's vocabulary is better. As Daryl learns, Bashar has more tools with which to communicate with us. But in that case, there is this kind of vague understanding of the subjects. And, you know, I think he once said, it's sort of like, just like, you know, you just woke up from a dream and you can kind of remember it, and then you can kind of remember it, and then you can't remember any of it. But some of it kind of sticks with you emotionally. I think that's kind of what is going on with him. There are other trance channels that will tell you that I have nothing. I have nothing for you. I go into trance, I could come back out 10 days, not know the difference between 30 minutes. And I have no idea what I've said. They have to go back and listen to themselves to see what they have said and to get their part of the message that they've delivered so that they can use it. That's kind of a heck of a thing if you think about it. You channel somebody, then you got to go listen to yourself channeling to find out what you just said. But that is in effect what happens. So it's very independent to the trance medium. As to how much information he retains. I've never heard anybody in trance, because the very definition of trance is an altered state of consciousness that's outside of physical reality. So consequently, you wouldn't expect to have any engagement with physical reality and experience of physical reality if you were, quote, in trance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in trance. We used to say things like, well, yeah, light trance and deep trance. But trance is trance, and the amount of information that comes through the medium of what he is delivering varies from person to person.
Now, let's get into Bashar a little bit more. As you know, Sinead and I have an opportunity to talk to him in August. If you were there, give me 2 questions that you would ask. He's discussed almost everything that you can think of, but maybe you would think of something that he has, that you've heard all his stuff. Maybe you've got something that we should really dig down deep in.
Well, I think one of the things that has come through recently that I found really interesting was the fact that Bashar is explaining that when he and Daryl find that point of resonation where he's allowed to use Daryl's voice capabilities to deliver his message through Daryl, when they find that, there is a kind of, how do I say this? There's a kind of knowingness, I think, that goes on between the entity and the channeler that's very difficult to put into English language. But the gist of it is that, and I think that he would say that this is the case, that what he would like to see explained more fully, and I would too, is that when they do this resonance matching, Bashar and Daryl have both come forward recently and said what's actually happening is there's a third entity that has been created. Now, this isn't a physical entity. This isn't somebody that sits in the chair like Daryl does, or even speaks like Bashar does, as much as it's more like an artificial intelligence. I think that's a good way of putting it. And that is what you're hearing. And what I found interesting about that, would like more explanation on that. And this would be a great thing for you to because it falls right on with the DNA experiment, Grant, whether Bashar agrees to it or not. If channelers are actually creating a third artificially intelligent entity, a higher mind entity, and we see a DNA change, what does that say? Is it a DNA change, for instance? Let's go back to Jay-Z Knight and Ramtha, which is who ran this originally, and you got this idea from. Jay-Z Knight, female channeler. Ramtha, entity that she channels. If this is happening with her, we know that when Jay-Z Knight takes her pre-trance DNA sample, it looks like this. When she goes in trance, it looks like that. And matter of fact, it has all the attributes of a male genetic structure. But is that really her DNA that's changing in her body? Or is this a etheric third entity that is in control of her body, that is actually having the restructured DNA? Because Anka and Bashar are saying that's actually what's happening. It's something like an artificial intelligence. The closest thing that we could, again, here's an analogy and an assumption. Closest thing we could come up with is that is what it is. I just, I don't know. I don't know where to go with that. And that'd be one of the first things that I would ask him.
Yeah.
The second thing that I would ask them, ask Bashar is he's always said that our first contact will be with two groups, two extraterrestrial groups. The first extraterrestrial group will be the children who are aboard the ships, who were created by the Greys by taking human DNA, cloning it, and creating these children who have lived on the ships their entire lives. The ships that they are living on are called the ships of the Yael. The Yael are the second contact race that we're going to have. So we will not get to meet the Essassani people, which is what Bashar is, for some time after we've had a primary contact with the hybrid children and the primary contact then with the Yael. What I'd like to ask them is, he's always said that there will be pockets, there will be select groups of people who will be selected that are vibrationally compatible to having extraterrestrial contact. And that's who the children will come through first. What I'd like to ask is, are specific locations going to be involved? And the reason I ask that is because obviously there has to be some specificity to location. If you're going to have physical reality, face-to-face confrontation and contact, you've got to be in a place in physical reality. So there's a location that has to be had. But what I'd like to ask is it time now to start telling us where some of those locations might be? He's already told us, Bashar's already told us, his ship is above Sedona, Bell Rock, I think it's 100 miles south of Sedona, Arizona. You go 100 miles up from Bell Rock, that's where his ship is. So he's already given us the location of where his ship is. He's telling us that the Phoenix Lights were Yael ships. So we have got confirmation that we are getting secondary contact, soft contact from some of these folks, especially with the Phoenix Lights and the well-documented series of lights and phenomena that was. So I'd like to ask him, is it now time that you can start to tell us who might be some of those people that could make first contact? What age groups are we talking about here? What kind of emotional composition? What kind of vibratory composition do these people need to have in order to qualify to be part of the first human extraterrestrial publicly acknowledged face-to-face contact? And there are some hints that he's willing to express some of those things, if not in specific locales, but in general terms. And one of the hints is that Bashar has said that when he started to move around the United States to, again, give channeled information, when Daryl would start getting out of his little area over there, he rarely went past Las Vegas, is now going and looking for places in New York City, and not too far away from you guys. And that was an indication that he's willing to open up some more about some of this very specific contact information. The other thing it tells us is that we as a collective, whatever we're doing right, because they're not backing away from contact. As a matter of fact, Bashar will say, he says, I wouldn't be here talking to you now if you guys weren't on the path to where you can have this kind of contact and have these kinds of relationships and be able to expand your consciousness. I wouldn't be here talking to you if that wasn't the case. So we know that we are continually getting a progression of information from him. I would like to ask him, are we at a point now where we can talk specifically about locations? Who gets to do that? How do you qualify? Are there age limits? Any of those more specific details? And what sizes of groups are we talking about? Are we talking about 5 people at a time, 10 people at a time, 50? And what requirements does the locale have to have in order for it to be suitable for this type of thing? And I'd say that he's hinted in the past that these are going to be remote locales. It's not going to happen on, 56th Street in Manhattan. It's going to happen, out in the Arizona desert someplace for a while. People are going to come back and report it. And just like all kind of extraterrestrial and spirit contact, it has to build. And it's building to the point where if you have 5 or 10 or 15 people come back and give you very specific information, which may include physical data like photographs and audio recordings or video recordings of these beings, that we're now at the point where that's going to be believable. It's going to be something of value rather than something for skeptics just to have a field day with. So those are the questions that I would jump right out at.
Sinead, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Walter, I'm thinking about the topic of, what occurs for the medium for the channeler when they are channeling a being. We just spent quite a bit talking about that in terms of, what could happen to their DNA. What's the experience for the channeler physically and otherwise when that's happening? So I'm having a memory of years ago, before I was in this field, being with a friend of mine, and we were watching TV, and there was some TV show on where it was showing this young woman, and it was set in the 1970s, this young woman who was trying to squeeze into these very, very, very tight jeans that were all the rage back then. And, there's apparently this fad of women having to lie down on their backs and use a coat hanger to pull their jeans up so that they could fit into them.
Good Lord, you're young.
So I remember, I remember that scene because it was so funny, and it was just really well done. She was struggling so much with trying to get into the jeans, and my friend turned to me and she said, she said something like, this is years ago, this is maybe 10 years ago, so long before I was in this field at all, but she was interested in channeling and mediums. She's still a friend of mine now. And I remember her turning to me and saying that she knew of this channeler, and I don't remember if he was a man or a woman, male or female, but she knew of this channeler who had started channeling quite unexpectedly, and it would come over him or her, and they would not be totally conscious of what was going on, but it would just happen. And then at the end of it, they would be completely exhausted, like absolutely wiped out, and would have physical symptoms afterwards of body aches and pains, something like that. So then the channeler becomes more and more experienced, and that happened less and less. But anyway, this channeler ended up going to a hypnotherapist or someone of that ilk and asking the hypnotherapist to help them understand what was happening to them when this would occur, especially back in the beginning of it. And, you know, why did it feel so uncomfortable afterwards? And so under hypnosis, the channeler was describing it kind of like those incredibly tight jeans that this being had to squeeze into her or his body or their energy field or something. It was like putting on a glove that was too small or putting on jeans that were too tight. And then eventually, the more the being did this, the more the two of them were able to just meld. You know, it didn't feel like such a struggle. It wasn't so awkward anymore. Have you heard anything like that? Have you ever heard of a medium or a channeler, sorry, having an experience like that, or a channeler going to a regression or a hypnosis appointment to better understand what occurs? Because they can't always remember it, as you pointed out. They often don't really remember, or they only have a vague experience of what's going on. So does that ring any bells for you? I'm really curious. That memory just came up suddenly. I haven't thought about that in a decade.
Well, I said to you, I said, you must be young, because I can remember watching my wife do the same thing. You got to remember, this is back before spandex and the, you know, the jeans that they have now they're flexible. This is, you know, all you had was, you know, corduroy and whatever else that, you know, Levi jeans. And so you had to buy them small because they'd always stretch out and you want your butt to look good and everything. So, you know, you had to go through some machinations to get into these things. And let me tell you, the guys did it too. I never used a coat hanger, but I put on some tight stuff when I was a little bit younger. But yeah, what you'll see is, again, different responses to this filling of their energetic, you know, existence. But it seems to be a twofold thing. One, the entity itself has a learning curve. How do I get my entity in the proper position so that I can produce the effect that I want? The channeler has a natural inborn resistance to this. I mean, channelers are born to channel in some respects, but we're all born with a natural resistance to things that are not comfortable and easy to us. So when an entity starts coming into a channel body, you'll see a lot of them will talk about the fact that becomes a very difficult thing, and it becomes more and more easy as they and the entities that they're channeling get used to one another. Again, I'm thinking it's got to be that finding of that resonance that they're looking for. They're looking for that matching energy. And in order to make that happen, they have to kind of hunt and peck around a little bit. So like, you know, trying to find an old TV, trying to find a particular station, and you're clicking and you're clicking and you're clicking and boom, there it is, got it, right? Well, I think once you know where channel 10 is, you know how to get there easier. So I think that's what's happening. It's a combination of things on both sides. Now, I don't know how much that necessarily relates to how a physical medium, for instance, and let's take Warren Kaler, because Warren is so dramatically de-energized after a physical mediumship seance that he literally, I mean, all he wants to do is go outside, have a cigarette, get away from everybody, have a can of Red Bull, and just chill out for about 10 minutes. And then when he comes back into the seance room, because there's always people there that we're talking about the seance, and he comes back in, he's just, I mean, he's about half there and half not. Now, he's been doing this 20 years now. I don't know how long. I don't think it's gotten any better for him. It's been a year since I've seen Warren, but the last year he was still doing the same thing. So however that works energetically for him, it's still completely depleting. There are others. Kai Mugi is a good example of this. Kai will come out of a trance and he will be lethargic for a while. He'll be dazed and confused for a little bit, but he comes back pretty quickly to the same old Kai Mugi that's went into the seance. So over the years, he and his spirits and spirit controls have seemed to have found some way of making this work better. And I guarantee you, both of them are overweight. None of them run or walk anywhere. And so consequently, this has nothing to do with conditioning, right? This has nothing to do. This has to do with how they accept and how they generate and how much of their own energy they have to give up. I'll tell you something that is funny about that. And I've mentioned this before. I've walked into seance rooms, and I know when I walk in there that this is not going to be a strong environment. Just something about it. Either the people are too skeptical, there's too many new faces maybe, they don't know what they're going to see. You know, there are people in there that shouldn't be in there in the first place because they're scared of the dark, or, you know, scared of those things that are not normal, quote. And you can get this kind of, it's like walking into any room, and sometimes you just walk in and the parlor is just, ugh. You know, you kind of get that. And I've noticed in those things that seems to be more physically draining on the medium, because he has to give up more of his own energy rather than being part of the collective. If the collective energy is not there, the physical medium then is responsible for the primary contribution to the energetic environment for these beings coming through. So, you know, it varies so widely that you can't really just say one thing happens one particular way, that every medium is going to be physically drained. Every one of them has a different reaction to it. And why that is, I'm not certain I can answer that question. I know the mediums don't know, because if the mediums knew, they'd change. They'd find some way to change it, because it's no fun to wake up after a 2.5-hour physical mediumship session with a headache, you know, and in Warren's case, he's got a nicotine and a caffeine habit that he has to satisfy. He hasn't had a cigarette or a Red Bull for 2.5 hours. So he's, you know, he's, you know, drained in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I know in Bashar's case, I saw Daryl Lanka saying once that he will often, even though he's been doing this for 35 years, he'll often be completely drained at the end of doing a public channeling, because maybe because of everything you just said, on top of what he said was the effort of not just housing the vibration that Bashar brings, like not just housing that in the physical human body, but also containing it, like controlling it so that it doesn't go too far out into the audience. You know, so I'm thinking about when Bashar is first coming into Daryl's body, you can see Daryl, he has these certain tics that happen, and his teeth will chatter, and then, you know, slowly his hands come together into that triangle shape, and then his body kind of settles, and then Bashar is there, right? Mm-hmm. And it looks like he has to kind of get comfortable. And then there's a public talk that I saw once where Bashar let his energy permeate out into the audience, and people started getting freaked out because they could feel it. One woman screamed or something like that. So yes. Daryl was saying that it's not just the effort of housing the energy, it's also the effort of participating in maintaining it, in controlling it within a certain field around Daryl's physical body, so that it doesn't go out into the audience who are not always able to manage it.
Yeah, you know, matter of fact, speaking about that, and I'm writing an article on this that when I finish up, I'll send you. The name of my article is How Alien is an Alien. And he was recently saying this very same thing. He was saying that, you know, Bashar was saying to this gentleman who was coming up to the mic, you know how Bashar works. He comes out, he entered Daryl's body, he goes through his tics, all of a sudden Bashar's there, and he says, good day to everybody and whatnot, and you start the session. And he'll give a monologue for 2 minutes to 20 minutes, and then there'll be Q&A. So in the Q&A part, this guy comes out and he's asking him about seeing one of his ships. He said, he's been a very arrogant guy, and he was saying, if you came down in your ship to see me, I wouldn't run away. And Bashar said, yeah, you will. And he says, no, I won't. He says, well, I know you think you won't, but I'm telling you, you will, because you don't even begin to understand how alien we are to you. And it becomes a matter, again, of vibrational physics. Their vibration is so intense and different from ours. It is, by the way, the primary reason, in my belief, that the reason the people who have extraterrestrial contact and have difficulty with it, especially if they have severe difficulty, like severe fear and whatnot, is it's as much an environmental and sociological condition. It's as much an energetic thing. They're getting bombarded, like you say, by a vibration that they've never felt before. And the first time you feel that vibration that you've never felt before, either its intensity, frequency, duration, or whatever it happens to be, flight comes as the first thing that comes into mind, and fear is right behind it. So it is the vibration itself, regardless of what they look like. Because Bashar can make himself look like you and me, if he wants to. Even though he's 5 feet tall and has no hair and, almond eyes and very sort of like a Zeta human hybrid. If he wants to appear as a human-looking person, but his vibration potentially may not change. So what you're talking about, this containment, what they're talking about is that they're not wanting too much of Bashar, the Essassani being, to emanate into the seance room, into the session room for the very reason that you say. There's no way that we can put up with it. He has actually landed his ship a couple of 3 times before, and people have said, land your ship over here and I'll meet you. And he says, about the time we get within sight distance, they split. They're gone. He said, not once, every time. He said, we just got tired of doing it. We're not doing it anymore. We know what the reaction is going to be. Don't care what you guys say. That's going to be the reaction. You're going to take off, and what's the sense of it?
We're coming up on 2 hours. I got the last question I want to ask you is, I think we were discussing it. Bashar comes out in December of last year and makes this comment about 2020, the thunder and the lightning, and stay in the center. What was your reaction to that? And can you add anything based upon what you know about Bashar and what he said?
Well, you have to go back a little bit further, Grant, and I'll try not to make this too long, but back in 2014, Bashar made a prediction. And let me use this word prediction very, very tentatively, because to Bashar, there is no past and there is no future. So there are no predictions. There is a recognition of events that are happening in parallel realities that may manifest in our reality, but there is no future to predict into. There's no past to, cement our physical reality, and it's all one moment. So what he has, let me get this correct. What he is basically saying is that in 2014, he said we would have, in 2016, the fall of 2016, it's called, which of course is our election year here in the United States. The fall of 2016, we'll have a major consciousness and political shift. And Trump got elected when nobody expected him to get elected. Matter of fact, I told my wife at the time, I said, she's a Hillary supporter. I said, you're going to get beat. And she said, what do you mean we're going to get beat? I said, you're going to get beat. He's going to beat you. I said, Bashar's already said we're going to have a major change in the fall of 2016. Well, ever since then, that leads up to now, here we are in the fall of 2020. And he has been saying that we've got, in 2020, that we are going to have some major decisions to make, some major experiences to undergo, and here we are in the middle of COVID. And I'm positive that's what he's alluding to. Matter of fact, I'm so positive that that's what he's alluding to that he has not come out and spoken about the coronavirus yet. Now they've got a session coming up. I think it's 2nd or 3rd of April coming up here very soon, and everybody's sitting on pins and needles to see if he's going to have anything to say about it. But he said that this 2020 was going to be an absolutely crazy year, a nuts. He said it's going to be nuts. And when he starts dealing out predictions like that, you pay attention because he has a history of making these predictions and seeing these timelines ahead of us and bringing us the reality of those timelines and being very accurate with them. So I think I've answered your question in what he's talking about as far as 2020 is concerned, but this has been a series of things that he's been talking about since about 2010, of these major shifts in consciousness in our political systems, our political parties. He's even talked about things such as the elimination of the income tax and the creation of a sales tax to replace it as a more equitable way of raising funds. You know something? I could see that being on the platform. It's been on the Utah and the Nevada platform, state legislature platforms. It's been voted down, but it's been getting more and more acceptance all along that we would have a sales tax and eliminate any type of income tax, any type of capital gains tax, and that we'd raise more money. And he's talked about several things like that that are plans for post 2020. I think that we may see some of these sweeping economic changes that he's been hinting at. And I think right now we're starting to see that start to come to fruition. So keep your eyes out, watch your legislators. And if they start talking about some massive redistribution of funds like they're talking about now, what sense does it make for them to tax me and give it back to me? So, you know, we've got some major fiduciary responsibilities as human beings that have got to change in some of these systems that he's been talking about that are going to collapse. He keeps telling us, there get your replacement systems in line because old systems collapse. They always do. You better have your replacements in line. These are the kind of replacements he's talking about.
So final question, in terms of what you know, in terms of physical mediums, all the paranormal stuff, Bashar's, are you optimistic about the future, or is it just an experience, or what do you see for the future in terms of, you were talking here just now about get things ready, but you've done a lot of study of channelers and all sorts of things in terms of what people are saying. How do you feel about the future?
I feel really good about it, and I'll tell you why. I trust myself. And I wouldn't have put myself into this physical reality experience if it wasn't a positive thing for me to do. If it wasn't a learning experience, what it goes on is inconsequential. As he says, circumstances don't matter. State of being matters. And as long as your state of being is good, it doesn't make any difference what happens around you. But I'm happy to be here during this time. I'm getting experiences from this COVID thing. I'm getting experiences from the Trump elections. I'm getting experiences that I came here to have. Themes, major themes in my life. And I couldn't be anything more than positive about the future, both my personal future and the rest of the future for all of us here, because there's not one of us in this Zoom conference or in the human being on this planet that didn't pre-plan their existence, come here for reasons. They're here to have those experiences, those themes, to walk those walks. And these are the times that we knew when we came into were going to happen. So it's happening the way it should. And as far as me personally, I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very optimistic about the future of the human race. We are an evolving race. We are not a race that is stagnant. We are becoming new beings all the time. We have children that are being born that are a different breed. They're literally a different state of Homo sapien. They call themselves Homo galacticus. They're showing the DNA transformations of it. We are evolving as a race. I just really couldn't be more enthusiastic and anticipatory about the next, say 10 or 15 years. It's going to be a hell of a ride.
Beautiful. I'll join you on the ride. I thank you, Walter Rucker, for joining us. I will have to have some conversations. I'll have another session. We'll have conversations with Walter because you are a wealth of knowledge in terms of all the stuff that I'm sort of just getting into. I rely on you an awful lot for, you know, advice on where to go, and I really appreciate your wisdom, and thanks to Sinead and Desta for joining us. Anybody else got anything to sort of add at the end, or?
No, that was so great, Walter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look, guys, I want to appreciate the wonderful opportunity that you give me to come and talk. And Grant, you got such an avid listenership and viewership out there. This is going to hit a lot of people. That's very exciting for me. I just want to thank you for doing this. You got two great assistants. You've put together an absolutely magnificent team. I know the first couple of emails I sent you, Grant, were a little harsh. I was trying to get your attention, but I'm sure glad it has worked out. And I can tell you, I've learned so much more from you and from your two fine assistants and from the people that I watch all your interviews and whatnot, and listen to them on my MP3 player. And it's just a constant, every day is an educational holiday for me. And part of the reason is because of the three of y'all. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for being on the path with us. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And we'll do it again for sure.
Hey, let's do that. Sinead, thank you. Desta, wonderful job as always from your new office.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too.